Welcome to From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. It isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how do we respond? Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. And now, here is your host, Dave Horlenbach.
Today's guest is Chief Otto Drozd III. He currently serves as the fire chief for Seminole County Fire Rescue in Central Florida. He began his career in the fire service with the Hialeah Fire Department in 1986. He worked his way up the ranks, eventually becoming the fire chief of Hialeah in 2001. He served as the fire chief for El Paso Fire Department and Orange County Fire Rescue before taking his current position with Seminole County. He has a master's degree in public management, executive fire officer designation from the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and was awarded a fire service fellowship to attend Harvard University's Senior Executives in State and Local Government program. Additionally, he holds the designation as a Chief Fire Officer through the Center for Public Safety Excellence. He has served in leadership positions in the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the Metro Chiefs Association as president, the Florida Fire Chiefs Association as president, and on numerous committees and task forces. He is one of the best leaders that I have ever known. He has been a mentor to me, a coach, and a friend.
Can we talk a little bit about your background? What led you to your career in the fire service?
Yeah, so as far as my background, I really didn't have any basis, familiar, family ties or anything like that that really led me to a career in the fire service. I take myself, kind of like most people that were, in high school at a certain point. You go through your life and that's all you have is your school, your friends, your sports, that kind of thing. And then I was getting close to the end, and of course everybody gets pushed into college, which I believe in some cases some are ready, some aren't, and there's all variations in between. I wasn't ready for it at that point, although I went just like everybody else, but I was always looking for something else. Me and a friend of mine, we started scoping out the different career paths, and the fire service seemed something that was a good fit for us because we had always been on teams, and certainly the fire service is a team sport from that perspective. We always wore uniforms. The fire service has uniforms. We used to go to practice almost every day. We call that training in the fire service. And game time is comes a lot more often when that alarm rings. So that was kind of something that, when I got into it, not knowing all those things, when I did get in, it seemed like a great fit for me.
You grew up in South Florida, correct?
I did. In fact, I grew up in the city of Hialeah, although I was born in Jersey and moved there when I was 2. From the time that I started applying for a job in the fire service, it took me 5 years, and I was fortunate to land with my hometown department. But at the time there wasn't any internet, so me and that friend of mine that became a firefighter also, we went to the library, grabbed all the phone books, wrote down every city and county across the state, and we started, kind of touring the entire state, applying and testing for jobs. And it just so happens that I got picked up with my hometown department.
What sports did you play in high school?
Well, I ran track, played soccer, and those were kind of like sidelines to football. So I played football every year, and the track and the soccer. We had a coach at one point that if you didn't play another sport, then they would put you kind of back in general population, not in varsity sports. Almost every one of us took on another sport.
It's interesting that a lot of the people that I've been interviewing that I believe are viewed by everyone they work with as good, solid leaders, they all have a background in some team sport, which I think the correlation is just really learning to work with others well and learning your place. I guess developing that personal identity of where you fit on the team. And some people learn how to lead others early on, and some people it takes a little longer. But I find it interesting that a lot of the really strong leaders that I've been interviewing have that background in sports.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Certainly, you learn how to be a leader as you mature within a team, right? And you naturally progress. But I also think, in a lot of people that are in leadership positions, they get there through some type of adversity, right? And having to struggle together with a team, having to work hard and overcome certain barriers, whether that be an opponent or whether it be a warfighter. And I'm not comparing the two, but there are certain analogies that adversity builds character.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, throughout your career in the fire service, do you have any incidences of adversity that help you develop?
Yeah, I think when you have adversity throughout your career. I think, coming into the fire service without really knowing what was happening. In fact, I got hired 2 weeks after my recruit class. So that was the first challenge that was put before me. The fire chief called me and he said, we had somebody that washed out of the academy, but you'd have to make up 2 weeks and you'll have to work late, work nights, work weekends to make up the time. And I was more than willing to do that. And every step along the way, there are certain rites of passage, whether it be your 9 month probationary period, whether it be a salty senior firefighter that you have to, win respect from. Because, and when I say win, it's more of earn respect from. I remember junctures all along the way from being a firefighter to being a young officer and certainly a very young chief officer and fire chief, that you get challenged all along the way. And you make mistakes, no doubt, along the way, but you learn from each of those, and I think you become stronger as a result.
Right now, you're the chief of Seminole County Fire Department, metro-sized fire department. You've been the fire chief. This is your fourth fire chief position, correct? I mean, the experiences you must have had moving through these different agencies has got to be immense. But how do you continue to learn in order to stay ahead of the curve within your role as a fire chief?
Transitioning from one department to the other, of course, you come in with certain preconceived notions, right, of what another organization will be like. But in speaking to fire chiefs that are making transitions from their home departments to others, what I tell them is that no two departments are the same, although they will be in large measure do many of the same things and have many familiar characters within each of them, but you can't take and put a template from one department onto the other. And then the challenge that I see it as fire chief is not in learning all the standard operating procedures, SOGs, or even the people. It's how do you have the people put trust in you by the things that you do and motivate them to make the changes within the department that are going to drive them forward and enhance their place in the community and with their elected officials, because that is really the key to being successful. You can be the best fire chief in the world, but if you can't get the people to follow you and buy into the programs that you're trying to put into place, and you can't get the elected officials or the community, then really you're really spinning your wheels in many cases.
In your position as the fire chief, when you go into a new department, what is your priority, your main priority? when it comes to getting all of those factors aligned? Because obviously you answer to the elected officials first. They're the ones that hire you. They're the ones that you work for. I mean, you work for the community and you essentially work for the firefighters. But how do you balance that, and what's the most bang for your buck? Where do you get the most return? You and I had this conversation, I think a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, where we were talking about my experience with you, and then how you've been demonstrating your commitment to the new department by going around and talking with the crews. I'm just wondering, how is there's
So I think what you're getting at is credibility, right? So how do you have credibility with elected officials, with the community, and with the firefighters? And that's something that, in large measure, is earned by the things that you do. But you always get a certain amount of credibility, or you get some equity that just comes with the job, right? And I think we spoke about this, that a lot of times in these positions, equity is like a bank account, right? And you get a certain amount of it, and as you go through with the elected officials and with the administrative officials, the things that you do, the programs that you push forward, how you handle critical issues, how you handle budgets, how you handle all those administrative tasks, either adds to your bank account, so to speak, or takes away from it. And it's the same thing with the firefighters out there. They'll give you a chance. Now, what you do with it is really up to you. And one of the things that I like to do is really go out in the initial stages and listen. I think you have a whole lot more, or you get a whole lot more from listening to the firefighters and sitting down with them. And once you can break the barrier of sometimes that chain of command and go down and sit with them directly, they'll get to the things that are really critical within the organization. And for each organization, it's going to be a little bit different. Some organizations are going to be starved for leadership. Some are going to be starved for training or equipment or safety and wellness. But those are all things that are common amongst all of them, that we need to look at.
So the question that I was trying to ask was, how do you balance your role of fire chief between serving the crews in operations and the officials you work closely with managing the larger issues, whether they're political or organizational?
That's a good question, and I don't see them as those two roles as mutually exclusive. I think they're pretty much one and the same, and the key is bringing those two groups together, because that's where you're really going to get some synergies, when you can align what the direction of the elected officials and the administrative leadership of an organization with the wants and needs of the firefighters in the field. And that's something that I've been able to do over my career through listening to people and finding those areas where both those wants and needs intersect, and then that's the area that you operate in. Those are the areas where you can get the quick wins, because if you're on the fringe of any issue, whether the fringe of the elected or the administrative side versus labor and firefighters, there's going to be some extremes, but there's always going to be some intersections there, where you can make some gains there. And that could be in the form of, okay, firefighters always identify gaps in service, right? And I'll give you an example. Recently, we have an area where there's a station that's going to be built, but certainly from the time that you decide to build a station to the time that you get it could be a couple of years, several years, when you align everything. But that's a gap in service. Now, something that came up was, okay, there's on the administrative and political side of the street, there's a lot of development happening in that part of town. So now you have we've identified an area where a station is going to go, which the firefighters want. There's the development that's happening there, where now you're pitting developers against consumers in the area or citizens within the area because there's not the level of service there to support it currently. So how do you make those work to your advantage? So what we were able to do, and the reason that we were able to do it is because we identified that, okay, these were going to be mid to high rises, right? And the new station is going to have an aerial apparatus, but we don't currently have aerial coverage in the area. So what we were able to do is take one of our stations that are in close proximity that don't have aerial coverage right now, and convert one of the engines to a Quint for a small upcharge on a planned replacement. And now you have more training, uh, more equipment and resources for the firefighters in the field, and you've addressed not only the citizens' needs for coverage within the area, but you've provided some shelter to the administrative and elected officials within the organization.
In my time working for you, it was interesting really seeing how you, I call it a balancing act, but really what you did was you found those intersections. And I always thought it was really remarkable how you were able to talk with the crews, meet their needs to a certain degree. I mean, you can't always give everybody what they want, but when you're capable of doing so, you were always very quick to make changes to improve services. And really, when I saw how you were received and through our conversation a couple of weeks ago, listening to you talk about showing the crews that you care, and you do that by listening and actually taking action. Where along the lines did you figure that out, or did you always kind of have an idea of that's what how you needed to be as a fire chief?
Well, so that's an interesting one as well, because when any of us think back on chief officers that we admired, we're leaving the service, we think, okay, that was a great guy, right? And we're losing a lot in that person going out of the service. But everybody comes from somewhere, and everybody develops over time. To me, in the fire service, it's constant development and reinvention of oneself. I always had the mindset of change. I didn't always manage it well. In my first stint as fire chief, I would make change, but it was more like ripping off a band-aid almost every time. And that doesn't always go over well. You really learn over time on, when rapid change is called for, and when a more measured approach is the order of the day. But it really goes to the larger strategy for the organization. Where do you want the organization to be? Because as firefighters, we're trained when the alarm rings, we take action, and we take action now, and then we reset. As you're moving through the ranks, your field of vision has to widen, and your perspective isn't necessarily for the time that it takes to resolve an incident, but it may be weeks, months, or years that you have to see and plan appropriately for those. So to me, when people ask me about that, I always go back to, growing up watching my father play competitive chess with, the clock that sets the time or starts the time for your opponent, and developing 2, 3, 5, 6, or 7 moves down the line in order to achieve what you're actually after.
And that brings us to a part of the conversation I wanted to have with you, is this idea of applying strategy to your career. I know that when I came on, I was very short-sighted. I just really wanted to be the best firefighter I could be. And I know that at that time, my thoughts were, I'm going to be, smoke eating firefighter for my entire career. And I was going to retire with some big burly mustache and soot in my nostrils, and then as time went on, I started realizing that there are so many different components to the fire service and things that I wanted to be involved in. And if you want to make changes within the service or within your organization and have influence, you definitely need to move up in order to have the ability to influence a broader range of people and situations. So I started, and this is just a recent thing where I started really studying strategy and looking at how it applies to the fire service and how it applies to just career development. I'm wondering, well, since you have such, you were exposed to this strategic thought early on in life, I would imagine that you approach things a little differently, and you've developed these ways of thinking over time to where now you're able to see a lot further down the road than you were when you first started off in the fire service. But if you had known then what you know now, what are some strategies that you may have taken to improve the path of your career?
Gosh, that's I really, feel like I've been blessed throughout my career, and to serve on as fire chief of 4 different organizations. I don't know that there's much that I would have changed, other than maybe taking a little bit more time along the way to mature within some of the positions, because here's maybe the downfall of the strategic mindset, right? So when I became a firefighter, I was always looking at, okay, what's the next step, and then the step after that, and the step after that, and it's pretty easy to look at what is the formal rank structure within an organization, and then see the people that are within those rank structures, and then kind of say either you want to be at whatever different level. But my mindset was to not restrict myself from any level within the organization. So as a firefighter, I looked at every position, including the fire chief, and I said, I want to have the opportunity to do that job someday. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to. These were the steps that I had to take, because I saw many fire chiefs over the years that were either strong operationally and really weren't as successful in pushing the agenda of the fire department forward, because they didn't have that administrative acumen. And then I saw some that were officers that got promoted into administrative positions and stayed there for almost the entirety of their careers, until they became chief officers, and they didn't hold the credibility in the field that is necessary to motivate people to new heights. And so really, along the way, what I wanted to do was build my operational capacity. So that's why I volunteered for everything that was available, whether it be special ops, hazmat, dive, airborne rescue, honor guard, all those things that the department could offer. And different departments have a wide array of things that people can do, but wanted to do all of them to build my operational credibility and capacity. And then started adding in all the formal education that was going to give me the ability in future years to compete for the highest level positions within the organization, without knowing that I really wanted to do it at that point, but setting myself up to take advantage of all those opportunities. Because if you're actually going to make effective change, then you have to be in the position that's going to give you the ability. And that's what that I, that I saw promotions as, the ability to affect change.
So that brings me to one question, then we'll double back to some other questions, but that's a good segue into, if money were no object and you were in the appropriate position to improve the fire service in America or North America, if you could do anything that could improve the fire service as a whole, what would you do? What do you see as the biggest issue within the fire service today that really maybe it's something that can change rapidly, but maybe it's something that's going to take years. I don't know. I'd like to hear it from your perspective. I don't know, but are you still involved with the Metro Chiefs Association?
I still am involved as a former president. I'm involved in different capacities, but I'm not in the leadership of that organization because they have their board and their current president, but still do work for them and still in tune with a lot of the issues at the national level.
So I think you've got a pretty good perspective and a firm grasp on what's being looked at as some global issues in the fire service. But from your perspective, what do you think the biggest thing, if you were in a position to change anything, what do you think it would be?
So you're right. There's a lot of issues within the fire service, and there always will be. And what I tell people about issues, as soon as we take care of the top one, the next one's peeking its head around the corner to take its place. So it's not really that we have issues within the service; it's how we deal with them and move on to the next one. So we've been really focusing on safety, health, and wellness, and that's certainly important because we lose far too many firefighters. Certainly technology within the fire service and how that's accelerating and how we can take advantage of it and better position ourselves to be successful as a result of having hard data to make decisions on is also critical. But I'm going to take it in a direction that may be a little bit different. So if you look at the structure of the fire service, I would say that one of the things that has held the fire service back is fragmentation. And what I mean by fragmentation is a lot of times we always look at our law enforcement counterparts, right? And historically, they've gotten more recognition, higher budgets. The current state is a little bit different with the current state of the world and some of the things that are impacting them. But in the fire service, we haven't been as successful because I believe we are more of a fragmented organization. There's nothing that really ties us together at a national level, like the police services. In most states, like in Florida, you have a law enforcement agency at the state level that really binds all law enforcement within the state. At the federal level, you have several of them, whether it be the FBI, DHS to a certain extent, some of those things that are federal law enforcement agents. In the fire service, we don't really have that. So it's really left to the local and the state level to decide. And we're all a little bit fragmented in the way that we do that, from volunteer organizations to combination to paid departments. So it's a little bit different. So if I were to take one thing and say, because I love our service, and I don't believe we take second seat to anybody, and certainly we shouldn't in this case. So if I were to say something, it would be to establish a national organization or some type of agency that would really take away some of the fragmentation that we see across the United States when it comes to the fire service.
Do you think that the National Fire Administration could play a role in that? I mean, I don't really know enough about the NFA to speak intelligently on it. I know that they're involved in a lot of training, but it's not necessarily along the same lines as like the FBI or federal law enforcement agency in terms of its correlation between the fire department.
And certainly, when we think of the U.S. Fire Administration, we would think that they would play a more significant role than they do. But really, I think either through enacting legislation or through practice, they fall under FEMA, it falls under DHS, and so they don't have a cabinet level position like an FBI director would have, like a DHS director. And in fact, several years ago, They don't even have to go. The U.S. Fire Administrator is an appointed position now, where it used to be a Senate confirmed position, I believe. So even that has maybe diminished a little bit from the standing of that position when it's buried 3 or 4 levels deep within another organization. So while I think it has the potential to expand and be that central clearinghouse for the fire service, I don't think we're there yet.
What do you think it would take for that to happen? Just, I guess, lobbying, probably.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what it would take because, when we look at it, when you look at FEMA, right, we have had one fire chief that has been in charge of FEMA. That was Dave Paulison, who made the jump all the way to FEMA. But if you look at a lot of the other organizations within the DHS, they're all law enforcement centric, and that's really because of years and years of really looking at public safety from the law enforcement perspective, which isn't all bad, but certainly we have a role, and in many cases, when you look at disaster response, certainly, while everybody has a role to play, I believe our role is critical. And when you look across communities within the United States, when disaster strikes, certainly we're on the front lines and should be.
To roll it back a little bit, we were talking about how you would improve the fire service in America. How about in your opinion, what's been the biggest failure within the fire service? It could be anything from well, I mean, the fragmentation is one, but it could also be something along the lines of a disaster, or I don't know. When I wrote the question, I intended it to be broad enough for I guess just to get your perspective on it. What maybe led to that failure? And one thing that we're great at in the fire service is when there is a catastrophe or something like that, when lives are lost, we're very quick to respond and fix the issue. When putting it in the context of strategic thinking, if we learn from past mistakes and maybe apply those lessons to, okay, why did that happen? What is the next thing that could happen down the road, and how could we avoid that by taking lessons from this? So in
Yes.
Europe.
So what I think is, certainly over the years we've had the opportunity to position ourselves in many different areas. I'll give you one example, right? So in the early 70s, that's when EMS came on the forefront, right? And in many cases, instead of embracing EMS as something that would push the service to new heights, we rejected it in many ways. And even today, we reject it in many ways on a daily basis because it doesn't have that traditional mindset of the fire service. But I think we do, not as good a job as we could do in really highlighting that we are truly an all hazards response agent. While fire is in our name, we do a lot more than that. And I don't subscribe to some of the thoughts that we should abandon the name that we've held for many years. But I do believe that we should certainly highlight and embrace some of the new missions that are thrown upon us, because we do have a distributed workforce that's very talented and very motivated to take care of their communities, and I see that each and every day in the firefighters that are there and the new firefighters that we're hiring. They're as motivated and as wanting to do good within their communities as any generation that came before them. Now, how do we tap into that and really highlight that we are that all hazards agency that takes care of our citizens, no matter what the incident? We're learning new things all the time, whether it comes to electric vehicle response that is going to be a heightened look at the new technologies, whether it be drone technologies or the use of data. we have the capacity, I believe, within the fire service to really highlight uh, the scope of services that we provide and really highlight how critical each one of our fire service organizations is within their individual community.
So just to rephrase that or clarify, in your opinion, the biggest failure is not really establishing the knowledge within the communities of everything that we do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like to do is I like to promote our service. I like to market the fire service and give people an understanding of who we are and what we actually do. So I think, without saying, I don't know if that failure would be the right word. I think that's one of the challenges that we're faced with. How do we highlight all the good things that we do on a daily basis to really support our community? And a lot of people within the fire service go, well, that's just part of the job. And while that's true, if we're going to sustain who we are, well, really highlight how critical we are to the infrastructure of our community. So that would be the area to where we can do a better job at really highlighting, how valuable the fire service and the people that work within it are to the everyday lives of the citizens that we serve.
Can you give an example of where you've been able to highlight some of the services that are lesser known within the community that the fire service handles?
A good example is, when we look at the fire service from the perspective of marketing, one of the things that I've invested in is our public information. How do we highlight those daily things that we do, whether it be an EMS call, a special operations call. Uh, in the Orlando area, we had a team that looked at all the attractions, the high angle team, and what we were doing is a really good job of highlighting those and getting those into the forefront of the media. Now, there's always issues with social media and things like that, and they say within that world that it takes 15 stories to negate one bad news story. So, how do we highlight on a daily basis all the good things that are happening across the entire spectrum of the services that we provide? And from a fire chief's perspective, that is, not only supporting and developing those programs, but having a visible presence within the department and within the community to really highlight when those things come to bear. We had some critical incidents lately, and one of the some of the feedback that I got from our firefighters was, we were glad that you went out. We were glad that you represented us and spoke on the things that we were doing. And so now you're not only highlighting that to the community, but you're getting more buy-in from the firefighters that are doing the work in the field. So those are that's an example of how we can highlight every day the things that we're doing. But you have to have the mindset that it's not just part of the job; it's something that we should be out there marketing on a daily basis if we're going to get the support at the board level, at the elected officials level, to really highlight the things that we do. Because unless we get it out there in the general public, you're going to get some of the same old questions. Well, fire department, we don't have that many fires lately, or things like that, which, we also have to change the way that we look at fire response. Because right now, across the nation, if you look at law enforcement response versus fire response, the numbers will be starkly different, right? And I had, I was at a community meeting where a law enforcement officer I got up and said, well, we ran 130,000 calls last year. The law enforcement official got up and said, well, we ran 1.5 million calls last year. They're not that much larger than us. Uh, so, I really, dug in a little bit And the way that we record our activity is selling us short in many cases. And a good example is a lot of people will say, well, EMS is 70% of what we do. Yes, it's 70% of what we do if you take it on an incident per incident basis. But what are the resources that we're sending to an EMS call versus a large scale fire call, a trench rescue, a hazardous materials incident? There's many more unit counts. And on the police side, a lot of the times where they get to that 1.5 million number is because they count everything, whether they're doing a wellness check, whether they're going to a lunch, whether they're doing a drive-by. And in many cases, they count every unit that's responding as a single incident. We do a lot of work that we're not accounting for in the way that we do our activity. And I think that's selling ourselves short a lot.
It's interesting. One of the things that you did within Orange County was you started counting a lot of those things that we had been doing for years and just never even going on the radio and advising that we were assisting somebody. Or I mean, so many times I know we've gone to people's homes where they stopped by the station and said, we're having an issue with this in our house. Do you have somebody here that would be willing to take a look at it? It's really awesome that in any firehouse, there's always somebody in there that's a tradesman that is skilled in something. And it's not just the fires, it's not just the EMS calls. We do everything. And we only account for a small portion of what we actually do. And when we started counting a lot of those things that we do, it was initially, I can tell you just from being there in the field and listening to people, like, it was always like, why in the world are we having to go on the radio for this? Now I got to do a report for this. But looking at the bigger picture, you understand. And that was one of the great things about you, was how you communicated, and the leadership program that we implemented. The key point in the very first class and in every class, as you move through the levels of the training, everything points to communication as being the foundation of sound leadership. The idea of communicating with the community and letting them know everything that we're doing is just another form of leadership, just at a much higher level, and really not allowing somebody else to define who we are, but defining ourselves for them.
Right. And so recently, one of the greatest compliments, which, at first I didn't think it was, right? There was a decision that needed to be made at a level higher than mine, right? But it had to do with the fire department. And they didn't necessarily contact me to ask about that issue. But here's the compliment, right? A couple months afterwards, I'm speaking to somebody about why they didn't contact us. And they go, well, they know that because of the data that you guys collect and the way that you communicate the data, if they would have contacted you, they would have been convinced to do something that they may not necessarily wanted to do at that time. Ultimately, we got to where we needed to be, but where we need to be as a fire service is to be able to articulate and speak in a language that isn't necessarily fire service centric, but communicate in the language of administration, of elected officials, in a way that we always are pushing the fire services cause forward. And I believe we can get there. We just have to highlight the things that we do and have the data to support it. Because the days of not having data to support a position are long past us. And if we're going to be effective in the future, we have to put those things in place that are going to give us the ability going forward.
The data, in my experience, and I think I'm accurate with this, but the accreditation process, I think, has played a large role in fire departments, in North America actually becoming data driven and adjusting their services based on that data and best practices. I don't know enough about that process and the organization to know when that started or how it started, but maybe you do because you've been involved with it to a great extent.
Sure. And so a fire service accreditation, while it does bring forth a lot of those things that you're talking about as far as recording data, looking at what industry best practice is, the question is how widespread is it, and has it really taken hold within the fire service? And while we're always making gains, if you look at the number of fire service agencies that are accredited, it's really a small number. I think less than 200, if I'm not mistaken. It could be a little bit more, but certainly when you have an estimated 40 or 50,000 unique fire departments within the nation, certainly a small fraction of where we need to be as a fire service if we're actually going to be effective. Even when we look at NFPA standards, these are national consensus standards that when we go back to the fragmentation, there's not one organization that says you shall. The standards say you shall, but it's up to the states, the individual organizations to really adopt or not adopt. And in some cases, they're adopting only a small fraction of the shall language within a lot of the standards that through consensus is viewed as best practice. That's where we get back around to the fragmentation across the service. Florida is different than Texas. Texas is different than California, and a lot of things that they require of their fire service agency. And that's where, you know, if there's fragmentation, then there's room to drive a wedge between fire service organizations and the things that they need to be successful.
What technology related to your role as fire chief are you researching the most right now?
Well, what I like, what I'm looking at now is what is the next generation of predictive technology. And what I mean by that is we take a backwards look a lot of times, and we say, based on historical call volume, these are the things that are impacting our service. So really what I'm looking at now is some of that predictive technology that gives us the ability with some degree of accuracy to predict the impacts of decisions that are made in the future or that will impact us in the future. A good example is a housing development, right? We know that in many communities, especially in land-rich communities, builders are going to go and build in areas that are further away from the built-up areas of a community, just because the land's cheaper. But now it causes us a problem because they're building further away from existing facilities, further away from the infrastructure. And if you look at how older communities were built, they were built in concentric circles around a downtown core. And then you had the redundancy of service that goes along with building a concentric circle around a downtown core. But now, when you have what they call urban sprawl, it's spreading it out further. So now, with this predictive technology, what is the impact of that housing development going to be based on number of units, response times, all those things? There has been some headway made in being able to predict the impact of these things, but it's still very difficult for fire chiefs to piece that kind of information together. So some of the technologies that are coming, I believe within the next several years, we'll have the ability to look at those impacts on our phones. In fact, I was talking to a software developer on that very thing because they have technology that can do some of this predictive analysis, but I have to wait sometimes 5 days, 3 days, 2 weeks in order to get the analysis back. I should be able to punch it into my phone while I'm sitting within a boardroom and give the answer to the elected officials that are going to benefit the fire service. And that's where I think a lot of this is going.
What technology have you been using that really isn't widely used throughout the fire service, but should be?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're using, but not to as great of an extent, is some of the drone technology that's out there. I can tell you we've used it on fire scenes, on dive scenes, on many different types of incidents, and the operational advantages that you get from that aerial view is well worth what is really a small expense when you look at it. And this is how I talk to my people about it. You know, for the price of getting an additional light on a fire truck, sometimes with a teleboom, something where you have a light and a camera, we can buy a drone for $3,000. You know, we can put infrared on it. We can put thermal imaging on it. We can put gas monitors on these drones. And those are just the uses that we have today. I mean, they're being used in wildland fires. You have fixed wings as well as the rotary wings. They're being used in some areas to deliver AEDs. That hasn't taken hold within the United States, but there's companies that are approaching it already. But you know, and I've told people I can see a day, and there's already some manufacturers that offer them, that every fire truck has a drone mounted on the roof. You know, when we're talking about doing our 360 and doing that size up, what is the ability that that drone's going to give us? And then if we take it to the next step, and this is where I want to go with it, what is the feed? Where is the feed of that drone going? Is it going to our incident commanders? Certainly it's going to our incident commanders. But a lot of departments have these very large, expensive command posts, mobile command centers, right? And that's a problem with the upkeep of the technology, driving it to the scene, and then actually getting people to use it. I think the technology is already there. If I spend 750,000 to $1 million on a vehicle, imagine if I took that $1 million and put it in a fixed room, but now I'm connected to the scene through drone technology, and I can feed the incident commander the hydrant layers, where his units are coming down the street, who his first, second, and third do is going to be, and where they're coming from, where the water supply is. I can produce the building schematics, make those pre-incident plans actually very usable, because now we're evaluating it in a fixed environment where we have all this thing at our fingertips and we're able to transmit it to support our incident commanders in the field rather than spending $1 million. And if you think of any headquarters, you have people running around headquarters that have years and years of operational experience. So imagine a call comes in, and now we have a hot center that we just flip the lights on. Everybody goes into a certain position, and we start feeding and receiving this information. How much more effective could we be? And that's where I see some of it going. And they already do it in the military. If you look, they can run a special ops operation from half a world away. We should be able to do it a few blocks away.
For young firefighters or aspiring firefighters or fire officers that are looking to promote and move up in the ranks, possibly to fire chief, what advice would you give them?
The advice I would give them is prepare yourself for any one of those positions that you think even there's the slightest possibility that you may want to be eligible for in the future. Because a lot of times when we look at life at a fire station, you get integrated into a crew that you love. Before you know it, 10 or 15 years of your career has been spent. Very productive 10 or 15 years, and you're having fun, but it may not position you in the place where you want to be able to take advantage of some of these opportunities that are out there. Not that there's anything wrong with staying at a station for 10 or 15 years. and loving the crew, we need those, but we also need to develop the future leaders of the fire service if we're going to be effective. And so it's positioning themselves not only through their technical skills, but also their administrative acumen, and that's through education. Because if we're going to be successful and earn the respect that we need at the local, state, and federal level, the one thing that ties all professions together is that educational piece. And I'm not saying that it makes you any better of a fire officer, but it does give you a ticket to the game.
Throughout our conversation, there is this theme of strategic thought. And I mean, for example, the idea of having predictive technology to make decisions based on where you want to be rather than responding to something that's occurred and playing catch up. So it's really applying the same logic to shaping your career, kind of looking at where you might want to be and kind of working your way back to where you are and maybe looking at all of the possible paths that will take you to where you want to end up. Um,
Absolutely. It's no different than, than in our lives, kind of like planning for retirement, right? You have to, you have to start saving and having, some plans solidified if you're going to be able to enjoy your retirement. Same thing career-wise. You have to start putting those things in place today that are going to make you successful in those things that you want to achieve in the future. And that is all about strategy. What are those things that you're going to do today that may not necessarily benefit you today, but are going to have long range implications for your success in the future?
how do you measure success personally and success for the organization? And maybe when you're evaluating somebody on your team, how do you measure success in those areas?
So that's a great question because and I've been asked that question in many different forms. And through the course of our careers, we'll have some wins and we'll have some losses. But the way that I truly measure success is in the people that I work with. How successful, when I leave, how successful are those leaders that are assuming those more responsible roles within an organization. I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of good people that have gone on to great success. In fact, I like to tell the story of one of the best times within my career was I was a battalion chief, and all of the stations under my command, uh, the officers at those stations worked on my trucks. So, it was, a fire scene. There was very little communication that was needed. It was more, uh, we understood each other. We understood the expectation, and we only had to communicate by exception because everybody was doing what they were supposed to do. So, and many of those officers went on to be, obtain higher ranks. And when I left my original organization, then the next two people that became fire chief had served on my staff for many years. So really, the way that I measure success is in the people that grow within the organization. And I tell people all the time, one of the parts of my career that I don't talk about very much because it was something that I did off duty was being a fire service instructor. And I taught a lot of minimum standards classes. And one of the things that I loved about doing that is you take somebody in that has almost no concept of the fire service, and over that training time, you see them develop and be able to stand on their own 2 feet and become successful as a firefighter and beyond. So really, uh, what I count as success is in the people that I work with being successful.
What has inspired you most as a fire chief?
What has inspired me most as a fire chief? The word no.
What's that?
Word no.
The word no?
But the word that we can't do. That's probably inspired me the most, um, because I believe as a fire service we're capable of anything. So that's where the strategy comes into it. I've had many projects over the years and many initiatives over the years that people have put together, and at one point it was even kind of a joke amongst my inner core of people. Uh, I had a file in one of my offices, and they used to call it the drawer of wasted time, because we would put together these really good plans, and they would go into the drawer of wasted time. But I can tell you that every one of those plans made its way out of the drawer and was implemented. Sometimes we had to regift it a little bit and tweak it, but there's a time and a place and an opportunity. And as leaders, what we have to be very good at is finding where that gap is, that we can insert ourselves into, and exploit the opportunities when they're there. And that's something that, whether it's in our project planning, within our long range planning, there's going to be an opportunity for someone personally, there's going to be an opportunity for the organization, but we have to position ourselves, by the things we do, by the way we go about our business, by the way we develop the talent within the fire service to be able to take advantage of those opportunities as they arise, and continue to make us an even more critical aspect of community.
What is one thing that, or maybe it's multiple things that you're doing in your current position to develop your people for the future as leaders?
I've done many things, certainly over the years through, leadership development programs, developing a career path. So people, rather than having to struggle identifying those things that they should be doing to prepare themselves for different promotional opportunities, to put it in one place, and people know what it takes to go from point A to point B. What are those hard skills in the form of classes, but what are those soft skills in the form of communication, um, in the form of interpersonal relationships that are going to make them successful. So putting those things into place, and then really building the bench strength through bringing people along at a pace that aligns with where they're at. One of the things that's asked a lot of times is, what's your definition of leadership? And certainly there's a lot of great definitions out there. One that really struck me as odd at one point was when I was fortunate enough to attend one of the Harvard programs. There was a guy that wrote a book called Leadership on the Line, which his name was Martin Linsky, a very sharp mind. And what he said was, leadership is disappointing people at a rate that they can accept.
Say that one more time.
Leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can accept. So at first, I was, I was a little appalled that that was his definition of it. And, his point was that the difference between somebody that is successful as a leader and somebody that is not successful is in knowing how hard and how fast to step on the gas, because you can overshoot your turn pretty easily, and you can implement things that the organization is not ready to absorb. And each organization is a little bit different. It's really almost an art form, right? Knowing, how much is enough, but what's not too much. Because if you go too far, then a concept that would have been a really good concept could be rejected out of hand because you're moving too fast and the people aren't ready to absorb, if that makes sense.
Yes. And that was Leadership on the Line. What was his first name?
Martin Linsky.
Martin Linsky.
That book was, it's a little bit dated. That was several years ago, but it was one that, one of those foundational books.
Now, one of the things that I know I've struggled with, and a lot of people that I've worked with struggle with, is time management. And when you're looking at developing, going to school, getting your education, and going to training and testing, and then building a family, and working enough to pay your bills, and all along the way, you either get overwhelmed or you learn to manage your time effectively. Based on what I've seen from you, you're married. How long have you been married now?
23 years.
Been married for 23 years. You have 3 children. You're a fire chief, a well-respected fire chief. You've been involved in, I mean, you were the president of Metro Chiefs. I don't know actually all the organizations you've been a part of and played a role in, but how do you manage your time with the responsibilities of a fire chief, and then maintaining a successful marriage, and being a good father? I mean, your children are awesome. Then you've been very successful as a fire chief, and in these other roles. It's a mystery to me. I don't know what it is that you do, so that's what I'm asking.
So it's kind of like, when I went around to the stations one time, and somebody goes, "Are you a fire-centric fire chief, or are you an EMS-centric fire chief?" And the answer I give them is, when you go to the gym, do you work out one arm or do you work out both? So really, you're always going to have competing priorities, but it's really, making sure that, you're focusing on the right thing at the right time. And then, none of us do it alone. A lot of times, what I found and what I had to learn when I was a very young fire chief, I didn't have a lot of staff and a lot of resources. So I was elbows deep into every aspect of the organization. But as I matured within the position, and as I went to larger organizations where I had larger staffs, I had to start farming out a lot of those responsibilities and trusting that the people that I was giving them to, with the parameters that I was giving them, what we're going to accomplish. And that's a little bit tricky for some people, because a lot of times your work, you have a certain mindset of how something should be accomplished, right? And the way I look at it, or the way I had to learn to look at it, was when I give something to somebody to do that is going to free me up to manage some of the other things that I have going on. When I give them something, I look at it as driving down a road, right? Uh, while I may like to drive down the center line of the road and go very straight down the center line, there's a lot of room on that road for people to drive down that will get us to the same destination. So while a project may be done slightly different than I would have done it, if it gets me to the destination that I want to be at, then I'm accepting it, because I can't do everything and I can't be everywhere. But you have to have trust and communicate what the leader's intent is to those officers that are working with you, that they're communicating that on down the line. And that's how an organization works. And that's how I've been able to really maximize my time and focus in certain areas. So what I see as fire chief is, I have all these things that you mentioned going on. Do I have to spend an inordinate amount of time on any one of them? At times, I do, but more it's just trusting in the people and kind of just tweaking the dials left and right from time to time, and then communicating what the intent is behind any direction that we're going as an organization.
I would imagine a lot of that, and just, well, your own personal mental health, being able to maintain your sanity with so many things going on. A lot of it comes in through support from your family, but I know that you're very healthy. You exercise, you eat right. One thing that I've wondered about you is how much sleep you get, because you're always going, it seems like. So, like, what does a typical day for you look like?
A typical day, I get up very early in the morning sometimes. Depending on what the regimen is, I'll either get up at 4:30 and I'll exercise in the morning, or I'll sleep until 5:30 or 5:30. Get to work, and one of the things that I tell all my folks is work can't be the end all. So if you have, don't miss soccer games, don't miss your kids' events. If you need to take off for those, go ahead and do it, because that is really going to make them better when they're there. Because if you keep them too long when they're worried about going somewhere else, how effective are they going to be? So to me, it's really drawing that life balance between, certainly healthy eating, exercising, focusing on the things that need to be focused on, and then, taking time out for yourself as well. As far as rest, you know, I think I get enough. So, and then the other thing is really what is your foundation? Certainly I rely, on my faith and my family as the primary drivers behind me. And when I get, just like anybody else, that I feel like I'm going off too far, they always correct me and get me back on the right road. And really, it's not about getting off track. It's about getting back into the mix and doing those things that are going to make you effective as a leader, or as a firefighter, or as an officer. And really, that support network and taking care of yourself is highly important to me.
I think I've covered everything that I really kind of put together to talk to you about. But is there anything that we didn't discuss that you believe is important to share, whether it be about leadership or strategy, or just what drives us, our inspiration, our philosophy?
Yeah, it's interesting because we did tackle a wide range of things, and one of the things that when we talk about taking care of ourselves and staying at the forefront, uh, is really looking at going outside of your own organizations. That's part of the reason that I like to be involved, and I like to involve other people, because you gain so much from going outside and seeing what other people are doing. When I used to go as a firefighter to the National Fire Academy, you always get caught up in what is happening within your own organization. And what you find is, well, you may be in a certain position. There's some people that have it a lot worse than you, and some people that have it better than you. So it really gives you perspective, right? Uh, there's always going to be the ends of those spectrums. And really, I like to send our people out so that they can learn, bring back new things that may not apply directly to what we're doing, but it gives them perspective on what we're doing. And it gives us the ability to introduce new things, because I think in order to be successful, we have to introduce new things into what we're doing on a constant basis. If not, stagnation comes into you as an individual, whether that be in your home life, whether that be in your professional life. Stagnation is something that really leads to failure in many ways. And I think I've relayed the story to you about, my philosophy when it comes to that is really developed by observing. And when my kids were small, I like to tell the story of being at a mall, and the kids, as most kids do, they looked at the escalator and wanted to wanted to run up the down escalator. And of course, my wife looked at me and she looked at the kids and go, "Well, ask your dad." And I was like, "Yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out." Of course, she goes, "That's not really the answer I was looking for." But as my three kids got on the down escalator and started running up, and it was a long one, I'm looking at it, and you know, that they get like halfway up, they rest a little bit, but as they rest, they start moving down. Then they start running again, they get a little bit higher up, and they rest a little bit more, and they go back a few steps. So organizationally, what that led me to believe, and that's the way I run, you know, organizations and I run my life is you can get to the top, but in order to stay there, you got to keep on moving. If not, you're going to go right back down to the bottom.
Yeah, that's an awesome analogy. Oh, one thing that didn't touch on that I think would be kind of interesting is how, in your role as a fire chief, have you been approaching the whole pandemic? I know a lot of things have had to change within the fire service because of the coronavirus, and I'm sure it's wreaked havoc on a lot of the things that you probably wanted to accomplish and just have had to delay. Um,
Yeah, and that's an interesting one as well because certainly the pandemic has caused a lot of us to do things differently. In fact, when I took my current post, it was the pandemic had already been in full swing. And we were at the very beginning stages because I started with Seminole County in mid-April. So the pandemic was already here, and there was already policies and procedures that were in. And if you look at the fire service perspective, many organizations stopped doing those things that made us who we are, or have made us who we are, right? In the form of training, our recruit class was postponed, and they were doing different actions, which were necessary. And you do those in emergency situations. But one of the things that we looked at is we looked at the pandemic and the impact that it was having not only to our training but to our development and moving forward as an organization. And one of the things that I tried to communicate with all our folks is, the priority is to keep ourselves safe. That because if we're not safe and feel a lot of the effects of the pandemic, then we're not going to be able to keep the community safe when they need us, and they do need us. Uh, but what we looked at is we also said, okay, all these things that were shut off, and many departments shut everything down, totally down, whether it be inspections, training, everything was shut down. Well, we started looking at all those things that made us who we are and have made us successful. And we said, okay, instead of shutting them down, how do we reopen them safely? And so, whether that be social distancing, the wearing of PPE masks, whatever the case may be, because I truly believe while the pandemic has changed uh, what we do, it shouldn't change who we are as fire service organizations. So, in large measure, we've opened up everything that we've always done and have not had any ill effects as a result because we've done it um, with safety at the forefront.
well, I really appreciate you agreeing to let me interview you, and this has been enlightening for me. I, we've covered so much information, and I know that it's going to help me personally, just how I approach things, and I'm sure the listeners will agree. I'd be curious to see the trickle down effect of how this influences people in the future. I appreciate it, Chief.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Yes, sir. You too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please visit hallenbachleadership.com for additional content. Dave's goal is to add value to as many people as possible. So if he can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with him via email or on one of his social media accounts, linked on the homepage of his website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them. And the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.